When I was first married, I knew it would be smooth sailing. I'm a modest guy, so I set a modest goal. Don't argue on your honeymoon. 10 days on the beautiful island of Kauai, I knew for sure I could accomplish this. Hello, my friend. My name's Zach. Back to my honeymoon story. On our honeymoon is where I discovered the hardest thing about marriage. And here's where I discovered it. I discovered it on the way to give my bride her wedding present. For a gift for getting married, I got her a massage at a high-end hotel. I knew it would be a great time, and so we drove to go give her the massage. 1 hour of bliss. And on the way there, I saw a sign for a waterfall. This guy is a sucker for waterfalls, and we had time. So I went and we looked at it and took pictures together. Beautiful pictures. They turned out great. And then drove down the road a little more. And I saw another sign for a waterfall. Now, this time is a little more crunched to the appointment. But I knew we had the space. So we stopped and got our pictures by this waterfall. Those didn't turn out as well because one of us was smiling. The other one of us was starting to get a little frustrated according to the pictures if I look at them now. But I was blissfully unaware. And so we get back in the car, and my new bride said, okay, where's the hotel? Give me the directions. And this is before cell phones. Like GPS now we have on our phones. So at this time, you looked at MapQuest, and you printed off directions to get where you were going. But only a fool needs directions. I knew how to get there, even though I had never been there before. And so I told my new bride, I don't have directions. To which she responded to me, my dad would have printed directions. And this is where my goal was not met. Because instead of just responding in love, I retorted back, well, if you wanted to marry a guy like your father, you married the wrong guy. Gentlemen, this is not the proper response. You don't start out your marriage telling your wife that you made a mistake by marrying me. No, this is not the right move. And so we got in an argument in that moment. Luckily, my wife, Rachel, is a very wise woman. And before she went into her massage, said, hey, I'm not going to enjoy this thing unless we talk about this first. And so we made up there. What makes marriage so hard is that it's two sinful people that are selfish. And throughout the process of marriage, two becoming one sounds really good on your wedding day. But the process is much harder than that. I was reminded in the Bible, Proverbs 27:17, and here's what it says. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. That is so true. And that happens within marriage. It's the beautiful part. It's the good thing that happens in marriage. But let's talk about the actual process of iron sharpening iron, shall we? To get a knife sharp, do you know what you do? You strip away the metal on the knife. And that's what happens in marriage. There's a stripping away that happens. This sinful part. Luckily, hopefully, I would not have the same response if Rachel told me her dad would have printed directions today that I did 20 years ago. In fact, I know that wouldn't be my response. And to be honest, I know she wouldn't say something as cutting as that today. Because iron surely does sharpen iron. And it's a great thing. But how do we make it a little less painful? How do we make the growth a little higher? That's what the rest of this video is going to be talking about. How do we iron out within marriage that two becoming one? It's 5 simple things, I believe. And number 1, often will happen in a quiet time in the morning, but it's that God is the one that changes us through His Word. See, it's in quiet time we can dive into the Bible and we can pray. This is a slow growth, not a fast thing. In fact, we can learn new habits, we can learn new skills, but character is something God forms in us through time. And I don't want you to miss this as we dive into other points, that it can be oftentimes when we're trying to change ourselves, when I'm trying to man up, when I'm trying to do these things on my own, it is foolishness. See, if you've accepted Christ, you've come to the same conclusion I have. And that's apart from Him, I can do nothing. Apart from Him, two becoming one does not happen. Because you and I are selfish, sinful people apart from Him. But in Him, there's a higher calling. I am challenged to serve my wife because of what the Bible says. And here's how it works often in my life. Here's how change has practically worked. I read His Word. It calls me to a standard that blows my mind, that I should die to myself, that I should live like Christ, and Christ gave Himself up for the church, that's how I should operate as a husband. And I go, whoa, God, you got a mess on your hands. You got something to clean up because I don't know how to live that out. Help me. Change me. And He does. You know, His Word convicts. And then we just surrender it to Him and say, God, I don't know how to do this. Help me. And in my life, it's been slow at some points. It's been quick at others. But He's changed things. He's changed my desires. He's changed my wants. He's allowed me to lay down the things that I want, and He will with you too. Number 2 is listen first. Oftentimes we want to fire back, like in that car that day in paradise where I fire back. Well, I'm not like your dad in that way. Instead of listening. What was she trying to say there? You know, I don't know. Because I didn't take the time to listen. I got my feelings in it. I worried about respect. My shame came out. Because an inadequacy was pointed out in me. And so we go on the defense. That just serves our selfishness. But when we have a posture of we're going to listen first instead of speak first, we're going to listen first instead of fix. We're going to listen instead of solve. We're going to listen instead of argue. When we come in with that posture, we have no choice but to lay selfishness aside. Because we are literally laying aside ourselves to hear. And honestly, in those moments, what you'll find is that you actually hear things that you've never heard before. You actually hear that maybe it doesn't have anything to do with you. You know, because my selfish nature and my shame nature says that, oh, what did I do? Am I okay? Am I this? And I could make it all about myself. But when I listen first, I have a posture of service. And it helps in that iron sharpens iron. Oftentimes I'm listening to wisdom come out of my wife. Or I'm listening to her heartache. Or I'm listening to her ideas and plans. But when I'm not listening first, I got a lot to say. And it sometimes does not serve me well. And I would imagine the same thing would be for you too. Number 3, perception versus perspective. You know, in every situation, we have a perception of what's happening. You know, in that moment, in Kauai, my perception was waterfalls are great. My next perception is the town is very small and hotels are very big. I will be able to see the hotel. But that's all I could see was me. And it's important that in our marriage we realize that because of our selfish nature, all we can see sometimes is ourselves. But that who we have married has a different perception on life. Some things are the same. Some are very different. See, me printing directions in that moment would have been an act of love and care and seeing her. But I didn't see that from my perspective. To me, I'll figure it out. I'll find a way. That's part of my personality, by the way. But it does us good to put on the glasses of another person, to put on their perspective. What would it might feel like? See, if there's certain areas in your marriage that you have conflicts, I guarantee you see one perception. They see a different perspective. And maybe, just maybe, you can put on their perspective for a second. Not to say that they see it right and you see it wrong. We won't say that. But for a moment, you might see a different angle. There might be a different side of the coin that you've never considered. and it might do you good. Here's an example from my own life. Early on in my marriage, we had young kids, and they're a lot of work. Yeah, I think from about 2 to 4, you're trying to just stop them from hurting themselves. And they have no recognition of what's going on. They're running into things, jumping off things, and it's tiring. You don't sit. And so at that point, my wife was a stay-at-home mom, and she was just waiting for me to get home. And I have a restaurant, and you don't really get home at a set time. Like it'll say off at 7 p.m. That's around 7. And so oftentimes a conflict was I would tell her I would be home at 7, and I would come home a half hour, sometimes 2 hours later because it got busy. And she would be upset because she's tired. And I would be upset because I'm tired. And really it was just one of us just looking at it from the other angle and having a play for it. Just saying, hey, text me that you're going to be late. That's all she needed. Number 4, forgive often. Look, I've repeated several times, and I'm going to continue to repeat, you and I are sinful. And so is your partner. You don't need to really tell them that. Pro tip. But because of that, you're going to hurt each other. You're going to fail. You're going to mess up. Sometimes those mess ups are really small. Sometimes those mess ups are really large. Sometimes those mistakes just take a moment to move on. Sometimes it takes years. But there is no way to have a successful marriage. There's no way to have that iron sharpening iron without forgiveness being part of the equation. We should be people that ask for forgiveness often and give it often. Don't worry about who's right and wrong. In every argument, there's a 51-49, right? It could be a 10% your fault, could be a 1%. But there's part of it you own. And the quicker we recognize that there's some part we've played and ask for forgiveness, the quicker we can just surrender to that process of God changing us. When we have a posture of, I'm not going to ask for forgiveness, or I'm not going to forgive, we can get stuck. But don't fake this. In my marriage, a good statement that has been factual at times when there's a big conflict and someone asks for forgiveness, it's not, I forgive you, when we're really not ready. It's, I will forgive you. I'm in the process of forgiving you. It's that it will happen. You're affirming that the relationship will come back together, that it will be mended, but that it's going to take time. And if there's been trust that has been majorly broken, that is going to take time. There's forgiveness and then there's walking it out, and those are two different things. Because when trust has been broken, insecurities can come up at other points in time. If you're the one that's broken trust, I just want to tell you, because I've done that, years from now, when you get questioned around the same thing, have a posture of humility. And just remember that even if they did forgive, there's insecurities that could rise up. And just affirm where you are instead of arguing. And I know that requires a lot of humility, but it's super important. Number 5, ultimately dying to self is what's required so that something else can be reborn. I'm not saying that you should just forget who you are as an individual, that it's no longer two individuals that are completely separate. No, marriage is a little confusing. It's two becoming one together in marriage, and then there's two individuals. But the process of any Christ follower, ultimately, is a dying to self. That's a sanctification process. We die to the flesh to become more like Christ. And that's a process that goes throughout our lifetime until death. I wish that happened like once and then you're done. And then I'm perfect. But that's not the way it works. It's a constant dying to self. And inside marriage is where you can see that the most. It's where God can shape us the most. Because it's where we can be the most loved. It's also where we can cause the most damage. It's where our sin rises up the most. It's where we lay our guard down a little more. The true ick comes to the surface. Unfortunately, sometimes within marriage, we treat those we love the worst because we let that guard down and the sin nature rises up. But in the end, ultimately, we're dying to that flesh. And so when marriage becomes hard, when that iron sharpens iron becomes so difficult, and you feel like it hurts, it's just rubbing raw, it's good just to remember that in the end, we're dying to ourselves. And that process does not feel good, but it is worth it. If we really want to be people that are dying to that sin nature inside, we need quiet time. And so if you're struggling to have quiet time, watch this video right here. It'll really help your walk with God and your marriage. Have a great day, and God bless you.